Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say ahoy or land ho and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu-El-Samad.
So welcome to episode 76. We've got some cars, we've got some email feedback, and a few topics. So it should be another good, tidy podcast. So first, let's do what we normally do, and we'll talk about things that we're driving. What do you got, Sam?
Last week, I took a road trip in the 2018 Honda Accord Hybrid Touring, which is the top trim level of the latest generation Accord Hybrid. It drove it up to northern Michigan to the management briefing seminars in Traverse City, and this is one very impressive car that is also very fuel efficient. The Accord, is technically a mid-size sedan, although, the what qualifies as mid-size has grown substantially over the years. And technically, if you ask the EPA by their classifications, it's actually a large car. But, that doesn't really matter.
I kind of agree with the EPA.
Yeah.
It's a big car. Yeah,
I mean, you can call it whatever you want, but it's the competitor to the Camry and the Altima and the Fusion and Sonata and the all the other cars that nobody else seems to want to buy anymore because everybody wants crossovers, and we'll get into more of that a little later on when we get into some of the listener emails, but. As far as this particular car goes, it was, I liked it a lot. Wasn't quite perfect, but we'll get to that in a second. The main difference from the previous Accord that I drove, of course, is the powertrain, which is a 2-liter Atkinson cycle 4-cylinder engine. So it's basically the same, a variation of the same engine that's in the standard 2-liter turbo Accord minus the turbo, and with different valve controls so that it makes a lot less torque than a typical naturally aspirated 4-cylinder would make. But combined with the 2-motor hybrid system, it generates a total of about 181 horsepower, and I think 232 foot-pounds of torque. So with the electric motor torque that comes on, strong, right from zero speed, it's drivability is fine. It has plenty of performance. It's not going to keep up, with a 2-liter turbo Accord. But it doesn't need to. It's comparable performance to the base, 1.5 liter turbo Accord, I think. And in some ways, maybe even slightly better because it does have a bit more low end torque. One of the interesting things that they've done on this new generation, is that, like the Insight, the latest Honda Insight that we talked about a few weeks back, this one has its battery mounted underneath the rear seat. So, if you've looked at, some of the hybrid midsize sedans over the last, 7 or 8 years, since the first Fusion hybrid came out, and the original Camry hybrid, one thing, one characteristic that all those cars had in common is the battery was usually mounted in the trunk area. And, so it would take up some of your cargo space. And it was also, it was typically towards the front end of the trunk floor, up against the back seat. And, if the manufacturers happen to retain a folding rear seat from the standard models, what you usually ended up with was a narrow slot to stick longer objects through. So, if you had something bigger you wanted to load in there, you might be out of luck. With the battery now mounted underneath the rear seat, the trunk doesn't lose any of its cargo volume. It's got about 16.7 cubic feet of cargo volume, which was plenty even for all the stuff that my wife and I took along for our week-long road trip last week. And
wait, how much?
16.7 cubic feet.
That's
It's a big trunk.
Yeah, that's a good trunk for any mid-sized car. I mean,
yeah, and it's very nicely shaped too. There's a couple of nooks, a couple of little cavities in the corners behind the rear wheel arches, but the rest of it, is basically just a big box. So it's really easy to pack lots of stuff in there.
Even with the sloping sort of coupe-like roofline.
I mean the trunk, the length of the trunk lid, is not that long, because the roof line kind of sweeps back almost to the trailing edge of the trunk lid. But the opening is still plenty big. It's wide, and it's tall, it's basically the full height. So it cuts down, right to the bumper, almost level with the cargo floor in the back. So you can slide in, you can put, carry-on size suitcases, standard carry-on bags, standing on their side, the way that you're supposed to put them in when you get on a plane. Don't put them on their side, on the back. Stand it up on its side, especially if you're in a newer plane that's got the bigger bins, so you can get more
like
bags
a pet
in
peeve
there.
To you, Sam, have you been traveling?
Oh, yes, indeed. So you can, it's tall enough that you can stand a carry-on bag on its side, and you can put like three or at least three and probably four, I think four across in between the wheel arches. So it's a really good sized trunk.
Yeah, that's pretty big.
Yeah, plenty of space in there. Plenty of backseat room as well for three adults. Although even though there was only the two of us in there, all the ergonomics in the front are generally quite good. I had no real issues with it. It's got a proper rotary volume knob and tuning knob for the audio system. The only real issue that we had with it, and it seems like there's a bit of some bugginess in the infotainment system software related to Android Auto. And one nice characteristic that the Accord has, and I think some of the other newer Hondas have as well, in most cars that have support for Android Auto or CarPlay for smartphone projection systems, there's usually more than one USB port, but typically only one of them is actually connected for to have the smartphone capability. The others are usually just to provide power for charging. In this case, there's one USB port in the bin at the bottom of the center stack and another one in the center console, and both of them support plugging in phones. And so you can plug in two phones. So if you and your traveling companion want to both plug in your phones and charge them, you can also in the menu on the screen you can nominally at least switch back and forth between the two phones. So if you want to listen to something off of one phone for a while and then switch over to the other one, you can do that without having to unplug and replug and go through all that nonsense. You just switch over from one to the other.
That's pretty clever. Can you use like fancy stuff, like use one as the Bluetooth audio source and the other as the phone?
No.
No. No. Like sometimes I have that
yeah, I mean,
option
you
of
can.
like,
Yeah, you can plug in, the two devices and both of them are connected, but you can basically use one at a time. So you can't use functions from both phones simultaneously.
Well, that's the next step for them. They should get on it.
Yeah. Well, actually, the next step should be fixing the bug where everyone from time to time, when you stop and turn off the car to go make a pit stop and then get back in the car, sometimes it just didn't recognize the phones, either one of them. Sometimes it was only one phone that it wouldn't recognize. Sometimes it was both phones.
So what did you do then? Did you have to repair?
No, just, had to unplug and replug. Actually, it usually took an ignition cycle before it would recognize it again. So, once I saw this happening a couple of times, I would, before driving off, I would, check to make sure that it was recognizing at least one phone. And then if it wasn't recognizing a phone, then I just turn it off and restart it. And then it would usually work. And, I'm pretty sure that this is a bug in the Honda infotainment system, in their software, because, we were doing it. We had couple of different cables. I tried swapping them around between the ports, two different types of phones. And also my friend Rebecca Lindland from Kelly Blue Book. She also drove up to Traverse City last week in an Accord hybrid, and she had a similar issue in her car as well. So I'm pretty sure this is a software bug, and hopefully Honda will get it sorted out pretty soon. But aside from that,
try swearing.
Yes, I as usual, I did do that, but
that didn't work?
And sadly, as usual, it had no impact whatsoever.
Did you feel better?
Slightly, only slightly. It did relieve a little bit of stress.
Yeah. So, did you try?
And that's always a good thing, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, swearing is a necessary thing.
Hey, they say that it's actually a sign of intelligence.
Yeah, it's cathartic.
Yeah. And I choose to believe that,
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. So with driving, one of the things that Honda talks about that's kind of slick is you can control the amount of regen with the paddles, the shift paddles.
Yeah, you can do that. And it's got it's programmed in, with simulated shift points, as many other CVTs are. This isn't, like a traditional steel belt CVT, because it's a hybrid. It's a power split hybrid, 2-motor power split hybrid, similar in function to the Toyota and Ford systems and GM systems. But it can simulate different gear ratios based on how you're controlling the motors, and you can also get some extra regen. And from a week of driving, I think we put close to 700 miles on the car. I averaged 41 miles per gallon with it, which is pretty impressive for a big, fairly large sedan, family sedan that most of the time was fairly loaded up with stuff.
That's a little bit off, though. Like, they say you should get 47 average.
Yes. Yeah, the EPA label is 47. I was not particularly trying to hypermile it.
So I was just gonna say lies.
Yeah. I was driving relatively briskly, but not at insane speeds. I was keeping up with the flow of traffic on I-75 heading northbound. Take that for whatever you will. And I got 41 miles per gallon, which I certainly would not complain about.
Yeah. Honda has managed to take the weird, because they had some weird in their hybrids. It went back to the Insight that was it was a little bit wacky, and that's why people still love the original Insight. But that sort of infused all of their other hybrids for a while. They had the IMA system. This doesn't sound like it's IMA.
That was more of a mild hybrid system. So that system, you had the electric motor was a disc-shaped electric motor that was hard coupled to the end of the crankshaft. And you could never really get true electric drive out of it. They could do what they called motoring with it, where it would cut off the fuel flow. But even when you were running just on the electric motor, it was, because it was hard coupled to the crankshaft, it was still turning the engine over. So it was cranking the engine, so you wouldn't get as much electric power as you otherwise would in a system like this one. When on the previous generation Accord, they introduced a proper 2-motor power split hybrid system, where one motor acts as the primary traction motor, the other one primarily acts as a generator, but you can couple the two together and get power from both. So it works more like a Toyota system or a Ford or GM system.
Is that what this one is, or is this just a one motor?
No, that's what this one is. All of Honda's, aside from the NSX, all of Honda's newer hybrids are based on this system. So the Acuras, the MDX and the RLX are using the same basic system, 2-motor hybrid on the front axle, and then in the case of those vehicles, they also have a third motor which is used on the rear axle for all-wheel drive, and then on the Hondas, on the Insight and the Accord, it's just the 2 motors on the front axle. So the 2-motor hybrid drive unit on the front axle. They're just front
So
wheel
have
drive
they-
only.
Yeah, have they managed to like make it the best Accord hybrid yet at a time when I don't know, like it almost feels like it's kind of an irrelevant model at this point, but maybe that's just me. You know, like the Honda Accord in terms of hybrid sort of fell off my radar. Like I don't think of the Camry hybrid either anymore.
Yeah, and you know, and that's, you know, I think probably a symptom of the fact that just in general car buyers are increasingly not thinking of sedans at all, you know, instead of crossovers. So, you know, I think, you know, I'd say, you know, this is a very good car. You know, and I'll be curious to see how the Insight does in terms of sales. I mean, the Insight is basically a new Civic hybrid using the same system. The main difference between this one and the Civic, the hybrid drive system is the same, but the Insight, wanting to call it the Civic, the Insight uses a 1.5 liter engine instead of the 2 liter, so it doesn't have quite as much power as this one. This one did feel more refined than in the Insight. It was certainly quieter. The powertrain was quieter. You know, even when it wasn't running in EV mode, you know, when the engine was running, this one did seem a bit more refined than the 1.5 liter in the Insight when I drove that. You know, so it was a great car to drive. You know, and the other, you know, the one I had was the touring model. You can also get it as an EX or the base Accord hybrid model. The one main difference between this one and the standard 2 liter turbo touring model is the gas engine versions, the higher trim levels, the EXL or the Sport and the Touring come with 19-inch wheels and tires, and all the hybrids are on 17s. So you do get a little bit more ride compliance because you've got more sidewall, which can also be very handy when you're driving on Michigan roads. Because as it turns out, the morning before we left for Traverse City, I was going around checking the tire pressures in all the cars, and I took a look down at the left front tire on my wife's Civic and noticed a bulge in the sidewall that should not have been there. And this is, you know, not the first time something like this has happened. It often happens when you hit the sharp edge of a pothole. So, you know, having 17-inch wheels definitely makes it a little less likely that you're going to have issues like that when you hit potholes, because the tire itself can absorb a little more of that energy.
Oh, I like sidewall because, like, at the end of the day, you don't really need much more than a 17 or an 18-inch wheel and tire. You know, you even though cars are heavier now too, you probably don't need a tire much more wide, you know, much wider than maybe a 255 or 235 section, depending on the weight. You know, it's funny. You get those giant 19, 20-inch wheels. They're really heavy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know, they degrade the ride quality, and they also degrade the handling because they add a lot of extra unsprung mass.
Yeah.
So, you know, but you know, the thing that originally drove the increase in wheel sizes, you know, when they started going from 14s to 15s and 16s and 17s, was the need to accommodate bigger brakes. You know, because they wanted to add bigger brakes on these things. But unfortunately, you know, they realized, hey, you know, or a lot of people thought these things look pretty cool, and so they kept making the wheels bigger and bigger, even though they didn't need them to accommodate the brakes. And so, you know, now you have 20s and 21s and 22s, which is just, you know, it's stupid.
Enormous. I mean, and you get the funniest thing too is like the big tough looking wheels, and you see teeny tiny brakes behind them.
Yeah, that's the thing that looks ridiculous. Although the car I have this week does not have teeny tiny brakes, but we'll talk about that one next time.
All right.
It's got 15.7-inch front brake rotors.
Yeah, that's bigger than the wheels I had on my first car. So
yeah,
that's great.
Well, it's funny. The night before we headed up to Traverse City, I went to Bob Boniface's Cars in My Yard party, and this is Bob is the global executive director of design for Buick. We ran an interview with him last year after the New York Auto Show, after the release of the new Enclave. And so he holds this annual party in his yard, where people drive in and they park their all kinds of really cool cars in the backyard of his house. He has a rather large yard. And
you've got pictures of this on your. Where did you put them?
I've got some photos on Instagram.
And yeah, that's right. So I'll
put a link to some of them up there on the site.
There were some really nice cars there.
Oh yeah, and Bob's got some cool cars. But one of the cars that was there was a fully restored 1973 Fiat X19. It was just fantastic condition. But the funny thing about this, this is a little mid-engine sports car. And if they were building the X19 today, it would probably be riding on 17 or 18 inch wheels. But this one was on 13-inch wheels with, four lug hubs on there. And, they're just tiny. And it's actually, if you have an older car like that, I was talking to the owner, it's actually really hard to get tires for these things anymore because they're so small.
That's true. And you can't get, if you can get a tire that will fit, you can't get any kind of performance compound or anything. You just have to take what you get, and it kind of sucks.
Yeah. I mean, you usually end up having to go with some of the oddball, some of the specialty brands, let's put it that way, companies like Avon, British company that, they still make smaller, they make tires for a lot of older cars like that. And they make essentially kind of, reproductions or at least they match the tire sizes of a lot of classic cars so that, and there's a few other brands that do that as well. But there were some amazing cars at that party. Ralph Gilles was there, and actually, I chatted with him, and we're going to have him joining us as a guest on the show, hopefully pretty soon. He was there. He brought his Lancia Delta Integrale Evo 1.
He has a Delta Integrale?
He has a Delta Integrale, and and he had it parked next to Bob's Integrale HF. So the HF was the original Integrale, and then they did two Evo versions of it. Ralph has the Evo 1, and then I haven't seen an Evo 2 recently, but so there were two Deltas parked next to each other at this party.
Good for them. Wow. I mean, the last time we talked to Ralph, because we I think me and Zach Bowman talked to him back on the Autoblog podcast. He's just a really nice guy. So I'm excited to have him back on.
Yeah. So we'll get him scheduled pretty soon.
And we can talk all things design.
So what about you? What have you been driving?
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a good pivot because I spent all of last week with a Raptor, a Ford Raptor, which, if anything, it's certainly an outstanding piece of design. This is it's a pickup truck that is designed to be the Mustang of pickup trucks, I guess, like the Mustang GT of pickup trucks.
More like the GT 500, I think.
Okay, yeah.
It's a big brute.
It is. And I don't mean that in like the way of like the old Lightning where it was sort of supposed to be some sort of like performance car equivalent. It has performance for different uses, usually on, unpaved roads. But it's just when you start to appreciate what Ford has done with the Raptor and how well behaved it is in pretty much all conditions. Cause I mean, I commuted with it. And it was fine. It's actually pretty buttoned down on the road, which is impressive because it has, a long travel suspension and it has those fancy, I think they're Fox shock absorbers with the external reservoirs and stuff. It's got some serious hardware on it, but it's pretty much comfortable in just about any situation you can throw at it. It's certainly most comfortable in the dirt, where I did.
Which is what it's designed for. I mean, when they first built the Raptor, they took basically stock one. They just added some safety gear and ran it in the Baja 1000, I think, or the 500.
Yeah, and like it's just it rides with a lot of discipline, no matter where you are. It steers very precisely. Actually, it's not like a truck with a big engine and a lift kit. It's really well developed. So it's easy to drive and it packs a lot of performance. That EcoBoost 3.5 is an amazing engine. Everything I drive it in, it's very impressive. It's got torque right away, and it sounds excellent in the Raptor. I think they've got bypass valves in the exhaust, so when you rev it up, it gets louder and like progressively less muffled. So it's
as all proper engines should.
Absolutely, like under overpasses is a great place. Like when you get off like a highway cloverleaf and then you've got to pass under the highway. That's great because you've got a little bit of a lane to you come out of the curve and you just lay into the power, and it's revving at the right speed as you go under that underpass to just make plenty of noise. It's good. It's a good truck. It was also $68,000, so it should be good.
Yeah, it absolutely should be. But it's interesting to look at how performance trucks have evolved over the last 25 years or so. I think kind of one of the first ones. You talked about it being more sophisticated and refined. One of the first performance trucks was the original GMC Typhoon. Or was it the Cyclone?
It was the Cyclone was first.
The Cyclone, yeah. The Typhoon was the SUV version of it.
But those were amazing.
In their own crude way, yes. I mean, It was wickedly fast in a straight line for its time. But it couldn't really change directions very well. Couldn't really stop very well.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like they're wickedly fast in a straight line now. I think the Cyclone would do 0 to 60 in 4.3 seconds. That's it was really fast.
Yeah,
that's Corvette fast.
So you went from this little hot rod compact truck, and then you had the Chevy 454 SS, where they put a big block into the full size truck.
Yeah,
and then you had a couple of generations of F-150 Lightnings for a short time, for a couple of years. Dodge was building a Ram SRT with a Viper engine in it. Well, it was an 8-liter Viper V10.
Well, it was a little different than the Viper engine. It was a cast iron version of the Viper, but basically.
Yeah. But I mean, it had the same compared to the version that they normally put in the heavy duty trucks. It had basically the same. It had the top end from the Viper engine.
Yeah, which
but with the iron block.
It just makes me laugh because that Viper engine, it's such a roundabout kind of thing. Maybe you know better than I do, but the apocryphal story is basically that V10 started life as a 318 or 360 in an LA small block, and they added a couple more.
I mean, it shares the bore spacing and and the deck height and everything with the 318 360 small block.
Which I mean, I guess it makes a lot of sense because it can run down the tooling, right?
And some of the, I think the first prototypes they built, they literally handcrafted prototype blocks for the first ones that they tested, and literally welded on extra cylinders and built a custom, machined a custom crankshaft for it. But then that was before they started casting the proper V10 blocks. But it was originally the engine was originally designed for the trucks. It was meant only for the trucks. It was never meant to go into a car. And then they decided to build a concept car around this engine to showcase
funny.
The engine. And that was the 1989 Viper concept, and it was such a hit at the first North American International Auto Show that they said, okay, well, I guess we better build this thing.
That's funny. It's funny Ford never did that with their modular V10.
Yeah, I mean they did build a concept. I don't know if you remember the GT90 concept.
I do. I remember actually going to the New York Auto Show in 1995 and seeing that with the weird. And wasn't that the year they had the holographic head and as part of the display? I think,
could be. I can't remember.
So, and the GT90 was like this cobbled together. The story behind that car is like, yeah, we needed something, so we threw it together.
Yeah, well, and the engine in that was a V12.
It was a pair of Duratex, right?
No, it was actually it was a pair of modular V8s, each with a pair of cylinders chopped off of it. So they took six of the 8 cylinders of two modular V8 blocks and welded those together. I don't think that was ever actually a functional engine, not that I'm aware of, but. That for at least for the show car, that was what they did. Yeah, is put them together that way. Later there were actually V12s made from 2 Duratex. Which what eventually became the Aston Martin V12. Yeah. And I think maybe some of the early prototypes were blocks welded together, but that one they actually turned into a real engine, a real production engine, and they still use that. To this day. And it's evolved a lot over the years, but that's, still, it has its roots in the original Duratec V6.
There you go. Contour SVT heart.
Yeah. But with that tangent, where I was going with this, was, they started off with these relatively crude sport trucks. And, it wasn't until the the first generation Raptor came out that, you really had something, they decided, none of those were, they were popular among a very small group of people because they weren't really very useful. Those early sport trucks, most of them sacrificed most of their payload. They couldn't really tow very well. They didn't handle very well. So they weren't really actually very useful as trucks. And it wasn't until Ford developed the original Raptor that, you finally had a high performance pickup truck that, could actually do something. They said, okay, enough of this nonsense with trying to build, a hot rod street truck, what do people want a high performance truck for off-road racing? And so that's what they built. And, now this second generation one, takes it to a whole new level. And I think, that's why it's been so successful. The Raptor is actually sold way better than Ford ever expected to.
Well, I think also the thing that they have smartly done is they've made it versatile. Yes, it's certainly in its element off-road, and I did some mild off-road driving with it. And, you can pitch it into a corner and it doesn't mind where there's low traction. It's very controllable, very benign. It's set up right for doing that kind of thing. But on the road, it's also pretty well behaved. You have a lot of truck there and a lot of power. So you can't corner it like it's, say, a Mustang. But on the other hand... Well,
especially considering how high up it is.
Yeah.
And compared to a Mustang, it's actually pretty soft.
It's very soft, yeah.
That was the thing I was surprised by when I drove it. It actually feels kind of mushy.
It does. And they've all felt like that. And that was sort of my biggest sort of bone of contention with the Raptor is like it's set up soft. So if you actually were to use it for... work, like towing or, using the payload and stuff, the softness might work against you. But I don't know. Cause I didn't pull a trailer with it or anything. And I didn't look at the tow rating, which I'm sure is lower than a non-Raptor F-150 just because of the way the truck is set up. But it's really benign in terms of its handling and it's well behaved. So it's not that you can't use it for work. And I think that's why it works out pretty well. It's maybe not your fleet truck but it's something that,
it's for the owner of the fleet. the guy that owns the contracting company,
right? But so
the landscaping company,
he can still throw his stuff in the bed, and the bed is decently sized. This was a 4-door, so it's enormous inside, and it's got I think it had the 5-foot bed, which is still usable for most of the stuff a lot of people are going to do with it, and it has all the built-in trailer brake controller. It has the trailer, the backing up assistant kind of thing. You can use it for most of that stuff. It's not what you're. If you really need a heavy duty truck, yeah, it's not your truck. But neither is an F-150. You're into the Super Duties or an HD pickup or whatever.
But with the an F-150 with the 3.5 EcoBoost, is rated at like 12,500 pounds towing capability.
Yeah, it's the towing is silly on the trucks these days. I used it as a tractor. I put it in 4-wheel drive low, and we actually, it's funny, you talk about stump pulling torque. I pulled out a stump with it over the weekend. And it was happy to do that. And actually I really enjoyed sort of the control of 4 low and just like, you can put the truck anywhere you want. When you're in that mode and off-road, it's got big mirrors, good visibility. The steering is nice and progressive. And when you're on rough terrain,
the towing
it doesn't
capacity is
kick.
8,000 pounds for a Raptor.
See, that's not great, but it's not bad either.
It's more than most people are ever actually going to use.
Right. And the powertrain is certainly up to it. So really the limit is the way the chassis has been set up. Because, you just... It don't tow too much with a Raptor. Just enjoy it for what it is.
If you want to tow stuff all the time, buy an F-150 diesel.
Yeah. I guess my biggest criticism is that it's still an F-150, but it costs $70,000. And as nice as it is,
it's not, but even at that, it's by no means the most expensive F-150.
That's crazy. It's like
you can get up into the close to $90,000 for an F-150 Limited, I think.
Oh, why would you spend that much on an F-150?
Or Platinum, whatever the highest trim level is.
Oh, that's so much money. I mean, I'm not a fan of the F-150. It's a great truck, but I don't think the interior is as nice as other pickups, and I don't think they drive quite as well. A Raptor aside, they're not my pickup of choice. The Raptor drives exceptionally well, so I really liked that. I love the way it looks. This was a nice red one. It looked fantastic. I love the way it sounds. It's like the Raptor itself. It's like I'll give it the little chef's kiss. It's a great truck, and it's perfect for what it's for. The interior isn't $70,000 worth of niceness. It's still an F-150. They've added some accents and some stitching and stuff, and the seats are very comfortable. But it's still an F-150 interior. So yeah, whatever. That aside, it's very well thought out in there too. It's got a lot of storage space. It's got a lot of connectivity. Sync 3 is kind of tedious, but it's better than other syncs have been. So they're working syncs in My Ford Touch and whatever. So they're working on it. One thing they need to stop doing is showing an animation of the thing you're doing. Like, I don't need to see a thing that shows where I've set the volume or the fan or whatever. Just don't show it to me. I can tell. I don't need to see it on the screen. And Sync 3, my biggest issue with Sync 3 is that, you're sort of like your cognitive load is higher because you have to remember how to navigate the system for stuff that you want to get at that should be just there. They've got hardware buttons, some hardware buttons for the radio, but if you wanted to switch sources or something, you have to hit the home button and then go to the source button and then select the source. So there's like 3 sort of clicks to do to get to the thing you want. And I find that with Sync there's sometimes a lot more button pressing on the touchscreen than you really want to be doing. And each one of those steps you have to remember. So it's a little tedious to navigate, but they can work on that. I'll let them. And then this week I just got into a Ford Expedition Max. So it's kind of like the flip side of the Raptor. It's the same sort of Ford truck flavor, same engine as the Raptor, but wrapped in that Expedition Max.
Lower output though.
Yeah. Man, do I love this thing though. Like, it's funny because it's so many of the same pieces. They're just arranged slightly differently in the long wheelbase Expedition, and I think it's a platinum trim. So it's very nice. It's nicer inside than the Raptor was. And just as a family truckster, drives really well. Again, it's exceptionally well thought out. The dynamic cruise in this one will actually low speed follow, where the Raptor would give up. So, some of the equipment is a little bit different, but, yeah, I'm very impressed with the Expedition Max. It just rides and handles and just does its thing exceptionally well. So for giant SUVs, like it's a winner. I haven't spent much time with it, so I don't want to say too much about it, but, and I've been babbling for a while, and we're 40 minutes into the podcast, so we should move on.
Okay. Why start now?
So the first thing I have up on our list is there's been talk of a cafe rollback, which, I've been boiling in a hot summer right now. We've got fires in California. The polar ice caps are melting. Permafrost is more like impermafrost. It's melting. There's a lot of stuff.
Now you can have a longer growing season.
Yeah, that's
you can grow more food.
Right? No, grow more weeds that crowd out the food. Awesome. So I guess there's a couple of schools of thought too, right? If you're going to roll back fuel economy standards, which I don't, it sounds like automakers are in support of it. But I don't really know.
Not really.
Like, it sounds good, right? Off the bat, like, hey, you guys are going to have to work a little less hard, but people still buy fuel economy. It's a thing that we do care about.
Not really.
Well,
they may say it, when you do consumer surveys, they say, yeah, I'm interested in fuel economy, but when it comes right down to it, they don't actually buy it very much.
That's true. That's kind of like,
you look at sales of hybrids and plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles. Americans, at least, whatever they might say, until gas prices spike, they don't really buy fuel economy.
Yeah, that I guess that's true. They say one thing and then they do another. Like, everybody will repeat buy low, sell high, and they usually do the opposite.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So,
but the thing that is really ridiculous about this, so in case you missed it, and I don't know how you could have, essentially, EPA and NHTSA announced last Thursday that they're going to freeze the fuel economy standards at the 2020 levels, which is about 37 miles per gallon. Which is like that's not terrible. I will say I'm glad that at least they're freezing at something above 16. Well, the only reason that they're doing that, though, is because they can do that without any action from Congress. Because in the 2007 Energy Independence and Security Act, which is what drove the increase in fuel economy standards. In that one, Congress mandated that corporate average fuel economy had to increase to a minimum of 35 miles per gallon by 2020. And, then, once you pass the law, then it's up to the regulatory agencies to actually implement it. And so they, when they started doing it, they had the, EPA and NHTSA talked with CARB and the auto industry, and they came up with this formula, and, they came up with, increasing to 54.5 miles per gallon by 2025. Right, which is like, and that was the thing. They were like, oh, the first part's not all that difficult to hit. It's when it starts to ratchet toward that 54.5 that it gets much harder. And then it was a 5-year difference too. So yeah, well, but the thing that they did this time, is they put in this footprint based formula. So not every vehicle has to hit 54 miles per gallon. It was, the targets were set based on, bins of footprint size, which is, basically how, the wheelbase times the track of the vehicle. How much space does it take up on the road? So larger vehicles like trucks had lower standards than a small car. So, something like a Chevy Spark, had to hit a much higher target than a Chevy Silverado. And the assumption at the time, when gas was $4.50 a gallon, was that sales of small cars were taking off, and they assumed a lot more small cars would get sold. Instead, what happened was oil prices plummeted in 2014, and they've stayed relatively low compared to where they were. And now nobody's buying small cars; everybody's buying SUVs, which, granted, have gotten more efficient over the years. They're much more efficient than they used to be, but everybody's buying utilities and crossovers and pickup trucks. And so it's more of a challenge for the industry to hit those targets, because they're not, to hit the overall target, because they're not selling as many small cars as they thought they were going to. And they haven't sold as many electric vehicles as they had hoped to by this point. For electric vehicles, because they have effectively, almost, they actually, they measure the efficiency of electric vehicles and convert it to miles per gallon equivalent. Right. And then factor that in.
And the MPG math is MPGE math is incredible to me. Like, okay, fine. Like, whatever you say, it's just like, how many miles does it go till the battery's dead? It's all I care about.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the MPGE goes, all they're doing is that, they did some testing, figured out that, how much energy is in a gallon of gasoline. And, it works out to a gallon of gasoline has about 33.7 kilowatt hours of energy. And so, they basically work back, from, for EVs, for plug-in vehicles, they look at, okay, how many miles can you, or how many kilowatt hours does it take to go 100 miles? And it's a pretty straightforward formula. To go from that to MPGE. It's actually quite easy.
Yeah, I was a humanities kind of guy, so this whole thing is confusing to me.
Well, at any rate, most EVs get somewhere somewhere between 100 and 125, 130 MPGE, and so that's the value that gets used in the CAFE calculation. And if you sell more EVs, that can really pull up your average. Well, as we know, they haven't sold that many EVs yet, aside from Tesla, and so it hasn't helped their average as much as they had hoped.
Yeah, and the ones that they did sell, those were the so-called sort of compliance cars, where their only reason to exist was to
a lot of them were, so cars like the Ford Focus Electric, absolutely compliance cars. The Fiat 500e, very much a compliance car. The Honda Fit EV, totally a compliance car. But there have also been a bunch of plug-in vehicles. The Chevrolet Volt, the Nissan Leaf, now the Bolt. Totally not compliance cars. I mean, they're available everywhere. Anybody can buy one.
Right. So I guess before we get too far off that, the compliance car, I think I've got it right, where they were sold in limited markets only basically to pull up the average, or was it to take advantage of carbon credits, or
no? It was mainly to be in compliance with California's zero emission vehicle mandate. They were primarily only marketed in California. Some of them, like the Focus Electric, for example, was nominally, at least, you could buy it in all 50 states. But, Ford dealers, if you went to a Ford dealer in Nebraska, the chances of them actually having a Focus Electric to sell you or wanting to order one for you were pretty slim.
Yeah.
You could find them at Ford dealers in California and a few other states, and that's basically where all of them were sold. Similar, and some of them, like the Honda Fit EV, were only offered in California. And, some of them that are still out there now, Hyundai and Kia's electric vehicles, the Ioniq EV is only available in California and the other states that follow the California ZEV mandate, the zero emission vehicle mandate. So the compliance part was, for manufacturers that sold more than a certain number of vehicles in California, they had to sell a certain percentage of plug-in vehicles. And so, they sold just enough, to meet, to hit those targets, and didn't really try to market any more than that because they were losing money on them. And Fiat, right. FCA was a prime example of that. Sergio Marchionne talked all the time about losing $14,000 per car on every 500E sold. So he actively told people don't buy this car because we're losing too much money on it. But he sold just enough. They sold just enough of them to hit their targets. So that's where the compliance car idea comes from. Now we're starting to move beyond compliance cars. But one of the things that I've been told by a couple of companies that they were actually lobbying for in changes to CAFE were some more flexibility in how they do the calculations. And one of the things that they were specifically asking for was if they sold EVs for use in mobility services like ride-hailing applications, to get more credit for those, so that instead of that counting as one car that you sold, just like any other car, as part of the total volume, maybe counted as three or four sales for the CAFE calculation. Because in effect, cars that were used in car sharing or ride hailing applications, were effectively replacing multiple traditional vehicles because people that are using those applications often were not, buying a conventional car or were driving it less. So the overall environmental impact was greater.
Well, yeah, but how does that square with the other idea or research has shown that actually those ride hailing apps have added cars to an already congested. They haven't reduced cars. They've added car trips and actual vehicles to the overall mix.
Yes, and if some places like New York in particular, it has contributed to some increased congestion. But on the other hand, you're getting more vehicle miles traveled per vehicle with EVs. Or let's put it this way: if more of those vehicle miles traveled were being done with EVs as opposed to conventional vehicles. So if somebody goes and buys a Cruise, and uses it for to drive for Uber or Lyft, it's going to be racking up more miles, but it's also going to have a bigger impact. So the thing with CAFE is it's not about congestion. It's about how much energy we're using, how much oil we're using, really. Right. As not so much about the energy side of it, but certainly the oil side of it. And so if those ride-hailing cars are electric instead of internal combustion, then yes, they're going to be racking up more miles, but in the process of doing so, they're contributing less to air quality problems and to energy use. So, that was the rationale there.
Okay, I'll buy that. Yeah.
So every one of those sold is going to have a greater environmental impact. Unfortunately, the current administration said, we don't care about that. We're just going to roll it back. And the argument that they're using is by freezing the standard at the 2020 levels, that cars will be more affordable. And then hence, people will buy more of them and replace more older cars. And as a result, they will be safer. And they're projecting, making some crazy projection about saving up to 1,000 lives a year.
No, they're full of crap. First of all, okay, what older cars? We've just spent the last 5 years at 16 to 17 million cars per year in the U.S. market. And they had, cash for clunkers. A lot of older cars have been removed from the roads.
Yes, a lot of older cars were removed from the roads, but there's still a lot of older cars on the roads today. I mean, the average age of cars in this country is higher than it's ever been. Yeah, it's almost 12 years. And there's more, there's more cars, more registered vehicles on the road than there's ever been. There's like about 275 million registered vehicles in this country. So yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah,
their math is nonsense. But there are plenty of older cars that could stand to be replaced.
Sure, it's just like it's specious to say that by. So wait. Why are the cars going to be safer?
Because they're newer and they're built to more stringent safety standards than they were, 15, 20 years ago. And they have active safety features and all this. So nominally, they should be safer and, protect their occupants better.
Well, but yes and no.
But the thing is,
right, they go in lockstep. Like, I don't know. Go ahead. Say what you're going to say.
The thing is, the thing that's so ridiculous about that argument is who is it that, is driving these older cars? It's people who, have less disposable income,
right?
Who generally can't afford a new car. The people that are driving 10, 15, 20-year-old cars, just because you freeze the fuel economy standards, they are not suddenly going to go out and buy a new car and replace that older car. They're going to keep driving that older car until it dies.
Yeah. I mean, the best way to encourage people to buy newer cars is to pay them more.
There's a concept.
Yeah. So every time I think about this, I'm like, well, I could replace the Crown Victoria with something that is more to my liking. And I'm like, why would I do that to myself? Like, that's a car payment. Like, I don't.
Because you hate yourself.
Well,
that's why you keep driving an old Crown Victoria.
No, I drive an old Crown Victoria because it doesn't cost me anything other than maintenance. And that's that's the same thing with anybody with an older car. Like, that's like the whole idea that you're going to make things safer by reducing fuel economy. Like, you're not, like, you're trading one health metric for another because all of the other things that go, like, if you roll back or freeze emission standards, basically you've stopped making improvements in terms of reducing, like, ground level ozone and smog. And so, like, people pay for it one way or another. Like, you pay in your health, or you pay in a car accident. And what did we have back in, say, 2005 to 2008, right? We had cars that got just very heavy. Well, one of the reasons why they got very heavy was because there were crash standards and safety standards that had to be met and safety equipment that they had to have. And it weighed a lot. And when you're building cars from, like different grades, older grades or less strong grades of steel, like, you just need more of it. So the cars got big and heavy. And now, to make them both meet those safety standards and the emission standards, you've seen everybody brag about how much more high strength steel and ultra high strength steel they're putting in their cars to, do things like reduce the size of the pillars so visibility improves. It's just like make them, make the body in white lighter so that they can add more equipment so that people will have a higher transaction price. And part of that is meeting the fuel economy standards. Like, everything works together. So if you take the efficiency standards out of it, like, I don't see how that really helps anybody. And at the end of the day, too, like, it's almost like an Apollo program. Set an ambitious standard and be flexible about, okay, this is unrealistic. They've done that more than once where they set the EV standard back when they had the EV1, right? There was a mandate for EVs then, and that turned out to be unrealistic, so that got rolled back. So there's like, set an ambitious standard and try to meet it, and that's going to make all of the tech better, and that's an area where trickle down actually works. So I've gotten that out of my system now.
Okay. And we don't need to talk about them trying to revoke the California waiver that allowed them to set the EV standard anyway. You can read the article I wrote on Forbes. There'll be a link to it in the show notes. The other thing that came out of the conference last week was SAE.
You just totally gave up. I'm sorry.
Yes, I did. Well, the thing is, we're going to be talking about this for a long time. This was just the first salvo. This whole thing is going to turn into a giant court battle. It's probably going to drag on for at least 2 or 3 years,
right,
before it gets settled. And there's no guarantee on which way it's going to get settled, even with a conservative Supreme Court, because it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and depending on how California plays it, if it's a states' rights case, it's not impossible that the Supreme Court could rule in their favor.
Yeah, well, so that's the thing too. If it sets precedent for states' rights versus federal rights, like that's a sticky situation. Maybe not just for EPA standards. Like you can use that precedent to apply it to a lot of different kinds of topics. So that'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, it's gonna be a nasty fight for quite some time. So anyway, the other thing I just wanted to mention briefly was Frank Mancheca, who's the chief product officer for SAE International, Society of Automotive Engineers, last week at the management briefing seminars, said that SAE is going to start. They're going to start the process of developing some autonomous vehicle testing standards, and testing procedures. So what they're not doing is they're not going to define, here's the thresholds for what makes a safe automated vehicle, but they are going to start developing standardized tests that can be used, so you can do comparisons across different vehicles, and hopefully over the long term, the goal is for those tests to be used as if and when regulations are developed, these will be the tests that'll be used to validate the safety of these vehicles. And the other thing that they're also doing is making changes to the way they to the level definitions for automated vehicles. So there's they now have split it up. So levels 1, 2, or 0, 1, and 2, which are, driver assist, are actually labeled as driver assist feature levels now. And level 3, 4, and 5 are partially automated to fully automated vehicles. So, anything like GM Super Cruise or Nissan's ProPilot or Tesla Autopilot, those are now classified as assist features, not even as partial automation anymore.
That's like a thorny thing to really define. Like the automated levels have always been sort of tricky and open too much interpretation. So I'm interested to see how they're going to say, this is a safe automated driving experience, and this is one that's a little bit more marginal, and how they manage that. Yeah,
well, that's the thing is, they're not going to define what the threshold is for safe. They're going to leave that to regulators to figure out, but they want to develop the test procedures. So this is something that SAE has done. They've done many times over the years. One of the most recent examples, a few years back, they launched the J2845 standard, I think it is, or something like that, which is, it used to be that every manufacturer had a different way of testing their towing capability for their trucks. And so they came up with standardized tests, so, if you want to, make a claim about how much you can tow, this is the procedure that you use. This is how you test it, so that, when Ford says an F-150 can pull 13,000 pounds and, Ram says, well, Ram 1500 can pull 13,100 pounds, they were both tested by the same methods. Similarly, back in the 1970s, we used to have gross horsepower ratings. When manufacturers wanted to claim, they tested the horsepower of their engines. They would put them on a dyno, and the engines would have no accessories on there, be no alternator, no water pump. They would have all the external stuff being fed in. So basically, they eliminated all the parasitic loads. And so that's why if you look at power figures from the 1960s. You'd see these gross horsepower figures of 500 horsepower for some V8 engine, but when you actually put it in a car, it was nowhere near that. And so they, SAE developed, standardized procedures for measuring horsepower and torque, and the power levels went down, but they were, now they were actually more comparable to, the power that that would be delivered, at least to the transmission, and it was measured with all the accessories on there, and power levels, from one manufacturer were more directly comparable to another.
Yeah, and now we don't have to worry about it because we know that when they say things like 797 horsepower Hellcat engine, you're getting
Hellcat Red Eye.
Yes, you're getting 797 horsepower.
Exactly. Because you don't want to be, gypped for, a couple of horsepower.
No, you don't want 793 or 772. You want almost 800. Not that you'll ever feel the difference. But like.
Are you implying that, a Model S that can go, that you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a Model S in ludicrous mode and one in insane mode, accelerating to 60 miles an hour?
Yeah.
That 0.2 of a second is not going to make a difference?
No. No matter how quickly you're accelerating or how slowly you're accelerating, you're not going to feel a tenth. A tenth of a second is too small to notice. But also, like, anytime 0 to 60 really gets below 5 seconds and then below 4, that's all is that is fast. You can't. That's just a lot of speed very quickly.
But it's all about the bragging rights.
It is.
You just want to be able to brag that mine can go a tenth of a second faster than yours.
I like to be able to brag that mine can go 10,000 miles without breaking down. That's what I'd like. The Model X has been the Model 3, has been fascinating to watch because people are starting to get those and tear them down and really like just look at how it's put together. So that's really fascinating to see. I'm still baffled by the claims that was it Monroe that said the Model 3 is like 25% margin or something like that.
Monroe and Associates, they do teardowns and benchmarking, and they claimed but the way that number came up, that was basically just for bill of materials. That doesn't factor in any of the overhead costs, any of the R&D costs, or distribution or warranty costs or anything else. So, it's not really a particularly useful number.
So I just don't get it. So basically it's the materials that are in the car. They're making a 25% margin.
Here's the cost of parts. Yeah.
Yeah.
The difference between the cost of all the parts and the direct labor that goes into it and what they charge for it is about 25%.
Yeah, well, which I think is getting eaten up by all of the other stuff.
And then some.
Yeah. All right. Well, that makes a little more sense.
Enough of that.
Yeah. So,
and we're not going to talk about what Elon tweeted today.
No, we're not. I'm not equipped. That's a business thing anyway. I'm not equipped to discuss that.
Well, it hasn't stopped me from talking about it to a bunch of people today, but that's my job.
Well, they could listen for it. I'm sure that you got on like some NPR show and.
Well, actually, I was in a meeting when Marketplace called, so I didn't get on there today.
Okay. Yeah. No, they talked to. Who did they talk to today? They talked to someone from the Washington Post.
Oh, okay.
It was.
They probably called Dave Sullivan and Rebecca Lindland and maybe Michelle Krebs.
No,
or Stephanie Brindley.
I've heard all of them on Marketplace because Marketplace usually occurs on my local station. It starts at 6:30, and I'm driving at that time, so I usually get to hear it. So, anyway.
Okay.
Speaking of super positive stuff, Car and Driver had some layoffs, which sucks.
Yeah, unfortunately, they had some cutbacks on their digital side. I laid off. I hear it's about 13 people. I know of at least 3 people who unfortunately got laid off. Pete Bigelow, who was on the show a few months ago with us, he was their transportation and technology editor. Bengt Halverson, who was their environmental editor, he was covering green stuff for caranddriver.com. And Eric Johnson, who was, I think, his title was executive editor of digital or something like that. Eric, has been with Car and Driver for 11 years.
Wow.
So he was not a newcomer. Pete and Bank had only been there a couple of years. There was some pretty substantial cutbacks there, unfortunately. And so if you're looking to hire some really smart automotive writers, there's some talent out there looking for work.
Yeah, I mean, that whole I never understood how they could screw up the magazine industry so badly. There's been a lot of consolidation, and there's not a ton of money, I guess, in subscriptions anymore. But the way they've divided up, there were some pubs that I wrote for where they had a completely separate digital side of the house versus the actual print magazine, and there was that sort of turf war going on. In the early days of the online stuff, that was the situation, especially at Car and Driver. It was like two completely different publications, the magazine and the digital side. And there's been a lot more consolidation over the years, but in the last couple of years they did hire a bunch more people on the digital side, but they were producing so you were getting the magazine stuff was showing up online, and the bylines from people like Frank Marcus and many others were on the website, but then there was also a lot of other digital only content, which is what a lot of these people were working on. So that it was more together than it used to be. But there was some digital only stuff that was also happening. And that sounds like that's where most of the cuts were. I mean, that's too bad, because that's your readership in between issues. But what do I know about running a magazine?
In a lot of cases, it's your only readership.
Yeah, I clearly don't run a magazine, so I don't know.
Yep.
I have ideas though. All right. We had some reader emails, you had said.
Yeah, I finally fixed the contact form on wheelbearings.media. Finally figured out what the problem was, why it hadn't been working. And because there was a change on the server side that impacted sending emails, and so I had to set up an SMTP server and all that nonsense that you don't really care about. Anyway, the contact form on the website's working again, and in the past week and a half, we got a whole bunch of emails. So let's try to answer a few of those tonight.
Okay, totally unrehearsed, unresearched, just shooting from the hip.
So how does that differ from anything else we talk about?
I usually try to do a little bit of research so that I can form an informed opinion.
All right. Well, let's get ready, fire, and maybe even name. So first one from Tim Martin. Dan and Sam, enjoy the podcast. Look forward to new episodes. Thank you, and we appreciate that. Recently, in March 2018, I purchased a 2013 VW Jetta Sport Wagon TDI post-fix. So this was one that had been gotten the updates to presumably make it compliant with emissions regulations, and overall enjoy the car. But for the first time since driving, I find the front seat in the Jetta to be extremely uncomfortable in any drive over an hour. I've tried all of the different settings, lumbar adjustment, seat height, location of steering wheel and seat, but nothing seems to help. I believe that the main issue is a lack of proper lumbar support, not enough movement in the lumbar region, and short lower cushion length. I have tried adding a lumbar support foam pillow, but it still bothers me. Is there anything I can do besides trying to get an aftermarket seat or finding another car? Any advice would be appreciated. And previous cars that he's owned are a 92 Infiniti Q45. Those were very cool cars. It's too bad they didn't sell better.
That's the original Q45.
That's the original Q45, yeah. 2003 Beetle TDI, 2003 Honda Pilot, and a 2007 Acura TSX. So as the previous owner of a Jetta TDI wagon, of the couple years older than this one, but it was the same generation. Personally, I did not find the seat uncomfortable. I know my wife did not. We had ours for 7 years before we sold it back to Volkswagen, and admittedly, the lower seat cushion was shorter than I prefer, being of somewhat long thigh. I like longer seat cushions, but as far as the seat back goes, I never had an issue with it, and my wife never complained about it. But seats are a very personal thing. Everybody's body is slightly different. And if it doesn't fit you, short of a replacement, I'm not sure what else you can do. I mean, you got any thoughts, Dan?
So this is, what year is this? This is a
2013. So it's the prior generation. So it's before they switched over to the current Golf Sport wagon.
I mean, my initial thought is like aftermarket seats are going to be probably, if you want new seats, that's going to be your safest refuge.
It's going to be expensive.
It'll be expensive. You can get Recaros or Corbos or something like that. The other thing you could do is get some GTI seats, which may actually be Recaros. Use GTI seats.
That's actually a really good suggestion.
They're going to have a bit more bolstering, probably more lumbar adjustment. I don't know how much futzing you're going to have to do they'll probably bolt in.
Probably not much at all.
The electronics and the electric adjustment would be my concern. Like, are the wiring plugs different, and will they talk to
depending on what vintage, of seats from a GTI or even a Golf R you find, if you find some manual ones, I think a lot of them were manual. It may be pretty trivial to hook them up, and it should bolt right in, because they're all the same platform, that 6th/7th generation Golf platform. So it should, if you can find a GTI or a Golf R in a scrapyard, one that's been wrecked, that's still got intact seats.
Right. And that's
probably your best bet.
That's going to be the trick, because if it's been wrecked, it may have blown the airbags in the seats. And this is the whole thing. Like, back in the day, we could do this stuff. We could swap the seats. Now they got airbags and sensors and stuff.
I think the last couple of generations have not had seat airbags. They've moved to the side curtain airbags. I don't think the Jetta wagon had seat mounted airbags.
Yeah, you could put them in the side pillar too. Yeah, so I just remember with my S60s, they had seat airbags like sort of in the side bolsters, and I made the mistake of turning the switch on with the seat unplugged from everything. The seats were actually out of it.
Oops.
And it got angry because it does the power on self test, and it says, oh no, the seat airbags are not there. They're not phoning home. And then it's a error message you have to go and clear. Luckily with the Volkswagen, there's really good aftermarket communities and support. So you should be able to get this question answered. I don't know if the VW Vortex forums are still pretty vibrant, or if all of that stuff has moved to Facebook, where I don't go. So, there's just community resources that should help you out. And then if you do need to sort of crack into the command and control of the car, there's VAGCOM, which is, again, not that expensive and easy to do. So Volkswagen, you're lucky that you're in a Volkswagen, because you have a lot of options and you should be able to solve this problem pretty easily. It'll either be spending some money on aftermarket seats, or finding seats from another Volkswagen that you like, especially if it's or an Audi, right? You could put A4 seats in it. On the same
any
platform.
Of those should, or A3. You'd want them from an A3 because they're on the Golf platform.
Okay, all right.
The A4s might fit as well, but if you get something from an A3, that's probably going to be the easiest.
Right. So.
And I just did a quick search. First listing on Google was for eBay Mark 7 VW GTI black seats, heated front rear set, along with the back seat if you want that too. Full set, $400.
There you go. Shipping's going to kill you.
Yeah, the shipping's another $200.
Oh, that's not too bad. I mean, look, you're going to spend that on a single Recaro. So
And that's in well, actually, you're probably going to spend twice that much on a single Recaro.
Yeah. Okay. I have not priced Recaros.
But I mean, these are in Asheville, North Carolina. And there's a whole page of these, of listings that came up. So you're not going to have a hard time finding some GTI seats. So there's your answer. GTI
the tartan
seats.
Ones. Tartan. Must get the tartan ones. All right. Next question.
Right. Next question. Let's see. Okay, Jeremy Kroll asks. Let me start by saying that we did help when we answered a previous question about how small compact crossovers are. Seems the government is just as willy-nilly as the car companies when it comes to classifications. Yes, of course they are. I do like the idea of using the roofline and rear axle for the classification. Anyway, was there actually a question here? Jeremy's not in Europe, despite what we apparently presumed last time. I'll have to go back and listen to what we said. He's in Dearborn and works for GM at the Warren Tech Center.
That's practically Europe.
Well, yeah, might as well be, right? Don't let anybody in Dearborn Heights hear you say that. He mentions that the Spark Active actually is available in the U.S. And he's actually looked at getting one, but you can't get a sunroof in them. And I was not aware of this. I had missed this. So the Chevy Spark is the small Korean-built subcompact, below the Sonic, and there you can get the active trim, that adds kind of like faux, what's the word I'm looking for? The shields. You know what I'm talking about. That you have on SUVs,
like the cladding and stuff
for off-roading. Yeah, well, the cladding, but also. I am completely blanking on the word for the piece of metal that goes under your engine and transmission. Skid plates, yes, faux skid plates that are molded into the front and rear fascias and the rocker panels to make it look sort of kind of pseudo SUV like, kind of like the Toyota Prius C that I complained about some time ago. So you can. This is another one of these sort of pseudo kind of crossover-y things, trying to take a car and make it just that little bit more like a crossover to make it appeal to those that say, I want a crossover, I don't want a car. So that's an option if you're looking for something small and sort of crossover-like.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. Tyson Nordahl says, let's see. Loves the podcast. Thank you. I have a bunch of them that I listen to throughout my work week, but I save yours for the last couple of hours on Friday so I can end on a high note. Man, I am sorry your week is so terrible that our show ends your week on a high note. Hopefully your life will get better. Anyway, a couple of things. Firstly, Dan mentioned again that he'd love to participate in a Lemons race, and I'd just like to remind you two that you both have a standing open invitation to arrive and drive with the Vancouver-based Flying Lumberjacks racing team when we head down to the Ridge in the Pacific Northwest every year. And Ridge Motorsports Park is where I went to drive the Civic Type R last year, and it is a great little club track. So Dan, if you ever feel like doing some racing, we can head out to Seattle and go do some driving.
I will let them know when I'm heading to the Pacific Northwest. I'm not. I have no plans to go that far west, but that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, nextly, as a 2012 VW GTI owner, I agree with you that the GTI is the automotive good stuff, the Swiss Army knife of
Absolutely.
Cars. And we've been discussing this with Casey Liss, who's promised to come back on the show very soon to talk about his experiences with the Golf R and soon with the GTI. We've been trying to convince him that the GTI is the better choice for him, despite the fact that it only has 2 drive wheels.
He's doing this thing. He's preoccupied with fatherhood, so there's that. But also, I think what Casey's doing is getting hung up on the paper specs versus the actual driving.
Yes, instead of how it actually feels on the road. But we'll take that up with Casey when we get him on the show.
We'll learn him.
Yeah, let's see. Anyways, he says the Swiss Army knife of cars. I can carry people and what have you comfortably and in style, and it's a willing participant in hooliganism up to a point. There's no turning off the stability control, so no lift off oversteer, no getting purposefully out of control in my GTI. Actually, if you push a GTI hard enough, you can get it to swing around a little bit. You just have to work at it a little bit.
Tire pressures. Tire pressures.
Yes, but you actually don't have to work at it as hard as you would with a Golf R, because the R is so buttoned down with its all-wheel drive and its extra mass that you really can't toss it around. The GTI is lighter and it is more tossable. It's not. You're not going to really get it wildly out of control, but you can have a lot of fun with it. He loves driving it, thinks it's pretty good looking for a hatchback. That being said, I've had it for a couple years now and want to get rid of it. Hey, there's a guy in Virginia who might want it for me.
At least the seats. Maybe you guys can trade.
As long as it's white and has a sunroof.
Yeah.
It's been mostly trouble-free, and that's how I'd like to remember it. He's in his late 40s and grew up driving light, cheap, mostly Toyota beaters in the 80s and 90s. So I'm kind of nostalgic for an older, lighter, really like the lightness car as my daily driver. That's just some boring backstory for you. No, it's never that boring. Anyway, the point I'm making is that I'm greatly annoyed that direct injected engines have an intake valve cleaning bill waiting for their owners at about 120,000 kilometers. So that's about 80,000 miles. And as I understand it, nearly all the DI engines are effective. Even Toyotas with two sets of injectors aren't totally immune. Have you guys got any thoughts about this phenomenon? I know I can take off the intake and reach in and scrape some of it off, but that's half-assing it, and it doesn't do a great job. To get them back to perfect requires a big chunk of dough at a mechanic shop for most of us. Is it just me who's greatly annoyed by it? I mean, regular maintenance is one thing, but this seems like a glaring design flaw. I suppose it's just the price we pay for more power and lower emissions, but are car companies working to solve the gummed up carbon coated intake valve problem? Thank you for your time, and in true West Coast Canadian fashion, sorry for the long message.
Just send the bats and we'll be fine.
Yeah. All right. So what do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I think that they are working to solve the carbon problem. That's why there's more than one automaker putting two sets of injectors on it now, port and direct.
That's part of why they're doing it. The other thing is to meet particulate emission standards.
Yeah. I think that there are those two benefits. And I do think that once it gets kind of carboned up, solvents may help you, and maybe your mechanic has some special solvent machine that I don't know. But generally the only stuff that's going to work is just like mechanical removal, and that's like walnut shell blasting or something that's not going to tear up the heads, but will clean the carbon off. I don't have a better solution. I haven't run into it personally. So, what's your take?
Pretty much the same. I don't know that there's any other real fix if that's a problem that you're actually having. I haven't heard of a lot of people actually having that kind of problem. And I think for DI engines, I don't know that really should be that much of a problem, because the fuel is actually being injected downstream of the valve. It's more. It seems like it would be more likely that you're going to have carbon buildup on a port injected engine where you're injecting the fuel upstream of the valve.
Well, I think what the issue is that the with the port injection, it's spraying on the valve and the fuel acts like a solvent at that point, so it will keep it clean. And I think the issue too is mostly on turbo DI engines, because you've got that extra bit of oil in the intake tract from the turbo. And
okay, yeah, that
so it's just like with the heat, once you shut it down, it cokes. So run good synthetic oil, I guess. Now that I think about it, like Mobile One.
Yeah, that would probably help. But what about a replacement for the GTI? What do you think about that?
Well, he likes light cars. So has he tried a BRZ? It's a light tossable car.
A BRZ or a Toyota 86, which is the same car from a Toyota dealer. yeah, I mean those would be a good choice. Although it sounds like he's he likes the usefulness of a hatchback as well. So there's not a whole lot of options there. Depending on how much you're looking to spend. If you're looking for something new, you might want to take a look at a Civic Si or if you want a hatchback, get the Civic Sport.
Yeah. I was going to say the Veloster,
else?
the new Veloster.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Actually, yeah. The Veloster Turbo. The new Veloster Turbo is actually really good, and it's definitely worth a look. You probably want to stay away from the first generation Veloster, but the new one that's just coming out now, is definitely an excellent choice. I mean, the first
generation is if you get the Veloster Turbo, it's delightful, but it's certainly not refined.
Yeah, I mean, for somebody coming out of a GTI,
you're gonna hate it.
Yeah.
But the new Veloster is really good, and there's I think there's sort of 3 different flavors of turbo. With they all have the 1.6 engine, but there's 3 different sort of chassis strengths, I guess, or tuning, where you can get a pretty lively car out of it. They've figured a bunch of stuff out since that first Veloster came out. And the new one, by all accounts, I haven't driven it yet. There's one in the fleet, but
I have, and the new one's got the same multi-link rear suspension that's in the Elantra GT Sport. Yeah, and it's really good.
And that's a good car to drive too. The Elantra GT is good.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and it's a good value. He does say he's kind of nostalgic for an older, lighter car. So you could take a look at an older pre-TSI GTI. Those were fairly light and fun to drive.
Older, lighter car. I mean, the answer is a Fox body Mustang.
Well, yes, the answer is always
right?
Fox body.
It's light.
If it's either Miata or Fox body Mustang, and having owned both of them, I mean, a Fox body would be great if you can find one that's not rusty.
I mean, that SN95, stuff doesn't really rust up there in the. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it does. They get salt.
Yeah, that's true.
Depending on where he lives in BC, it could be salty.
But I don't think that an SN95 Mustang is probably the right choice. I'm just kind of scratching my. There is a wealth of choice depending on how old you want to go. So write back and let us know how old you would go.
If you can find like a 1991 to 93 5-liter LX, that would be, there's your car.
I mean, that's 91 that's a great car, but that's that you're starting to get into that territory where it's like rare-ish,
Not really. They're not. I mean, that was like the last iteration of the Fox, of the original Fox bodies before they went to SN95, which is a Fox variation.
Yeah, I got a couple more spot welds.
Yeah. So those those 91 to 93 models still had the old 302, the old 5-liter V8. He had a Borg Warner T5. They were remarkably light, especially if you get the notch back. The notch. Yeah. They were just over 3,000 pounds, and they also had from the 91s on, they had a little bit bigger brakes. They had, that was the 91 was the first year of the 16-inch wheels. Which is that was what I had. I had a 91.
Did they have the 4-shock setup where they did control axle hop?
Yes, it was more managed. It was better managed than earlier Fox bodies.
Yeah, still a mess.
I think that came in '88 is when they added that.
Yeah.
So you get the quad shock rear end with the 2 horizontal dampers in addition to the 2 vertical dampers, and they're just a hoot to drive.
Yeah, and I mean, if you want a car that will just spin right the hell out from under you in like the wet, that's... You know what I had happen to me? I shut off the traction control in the 370Z I had the other week, and it did the same thing. Just stepped right out sideways when I made a tight turn during my commute. I my first turn on the commute home is a U-turn. I have a left arrow for it, and the 370Z just went completely sideways, and I wasn't doing anything. It was just like, nope, this is what we're doing. And I hadn't experienced that since I drove a high power Fox or something like that. I forget exactly what it was, but it was one of those like 90s pony cars that would do that to you. And I was just like, whoa, all right, guess we're doing that for now. So those are the kind of thrills you have to look forward to with the Fox Body Mustang GT.
And with that, let's hit one more email, and we'll save a few for next week. And that's a great transition into this last email from Greg Padberg. And he says, in a recent podcast episode, you formerly referred to front-wheel drive vehicles as wrong-wheel drive, but that your opinion has changed. The cars have improved. What are the current notable examples of this, and which current or new vehicles can still be considered examples of wrong-wheel drive? And, cars like that Mustang, cars of that era, that's the kind of thing that made front wheel drive wrong wheel drive, because you couldn't get the ability to just spin the car on a dime in the wet with a front wheel drive car. It just, physics just did not allow it to happen. And, so you had to have a rear wheel drive car to have that sort of fun in a motor vehicle.
Yeah. And anytime I get in the snow with a rear wheel drive car, that muscle memory of like, oh, here's how you rotate with the throttle and put the car exactly where you want it, happens, where I can't do that with the front wheel drive car. Because the front wheel drive cars they're just going to plow off the road nose first. No matter where you have the wheels pointed, you do something wrong, you're going for a ride. That's like understeer versus oversteer. So there are other ways to get a front wheel drive car to rotate in low traction, but yeah, I mean, front wheel drive has gotten a lot better. Pretty much anything Mazda makes, no matter which wheels are driven, handles properly.
Yeah. And similarly for, Hondas are also really good at this, especially the Civic Type R, which Casey will not want to hear this, but I will say that is a perfect example of how good front wheel drive has gotten in the last 25 years. The Type R, you can turn that thing with the throttle, with the brakes. It really does feel more like a rear wheel drive car. I mean, ultimately, it's still gonna understeer, but when you're driving it hard through corners, you can trail brake that into corners and bring, in a really controlled manner, bring the back end around in a way that, you just could not do with front wheel drive cars, back in the 90s. And a big part of that is advances in the suspension geometries, especially the front suspension geometries. One of the big things that's happened, almost all front wheel drive cars have, some variation of a strut front suspension, because you need something compact in there to fit the engine sitting crossways, transverse.
The Civic, I believe, makes a return to, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought they had returned to a different front end setup. It's
still a strut, but it's one of this newer, on the Type R especially, the base, all the Civics have a strut front suspension, but the Type R has a different setup from other Civics. And what they do is they've actually got an extra ball joint in there, basically, so that it separates the steering axis from the vertical travel, the axis of vertical travel, right. So that it pretty much eliminates torque steer. And this is something that, car makers first started doing about 10 years ago.
That's the Hyperstrut. If you buy a GM car.
The GM Hyperstrut is an example of that. Audi was actually one of the first manufacturers to do this on some of their front wheel drive cars, and starting about the early 2000s.
But they went crazy. They had like 8 ball joints in the front end, because each control arm there was a ball joint on it wasn't. They basically split, like you think of A arms, right? So you got 2 A arms, an upper and a lower. They split it. It was 2 links on top, and there's a ball joint on either one of those, and there's 2 links on the bottom. It's a ball joint on either one of those, and there's 2 sides of the car.
They probably took it a little bit too far.
It was beautiful.
You know, it's a German car maker, so what do you expect?
You'd watch it all articulate when you turn the wheels, and you could see what it was doing. Yeah, and the Hyperstrut is like it does most of that. It's a lot more elegant. It does, like you're saying, what does it move the virtual steering axis out to the center line of the wheel? So that
so you know, basically separating the forces, you know, so that they're not acting against each other so much, and so you get, you know, a much more controlled feel. You know, like I said, it pretty much eliminates torque steer, at least within the realm of power and torque that you have on any of these vehicles, you know, the way the rest of the car is set up is so nicely balanced. You know, you can you know, get some mild oversteer, you know, by managing the brake and the accelerator, you know, trail braking into corners. You can get the back end to come around a little bit, and it's really easy to control, and it just drives really well. You know, ultimately, you know, no matter how sophisticated your front suspension is, you know, if you're having the same set of wheels do the tractive effort and the steering control, you're gonna hit a wall at some point. Hopefully not literally, but I mean, you're gonna. There's limits. You know, there's physical limits to what you can do, but within any kind of reasonable limits of what you're ever going to do on, hopefully ever do on public streets. You know, most of these cars work really, really well.
You know, Mini's another example of front wheel drive cars that are set up to handle pretty nicely. And it's different though, no matter what. Front wheel drive behaves differently than rear wheel drive, and you have to adjust your driving style to just manage the physics that are going on. And there's been this proliferation of all wheel drive too. And sometimes that can be really surprising. I was shocked at how well the not even this generation, but the earlier Buick Regal Turbo would handle, especially if you shut off the traction controller, put it in sport mode, or did both. I forget exactly what I did, but it will actually oversteer. Because it'll, you know, you go around a corner, you stomp on it, it'll transfer power to the rear axle. And that car has this split personality where it's like just a front wheel drive Regal when you're just tottering around. But if you want to drive it, you know, with some red mist, it'll play along. And that was really impressive to me, especially from a Buick. So there's surprises out there if you're willing to look.
Yeah. Greg also asked about the Acades engine, and since we're now at about an hour and 40 minutes, we'll leave that for next time. I have talked and written about the Acades engine in the past, but we'll come back to that. It's an opposed piston 2-stroke engine that is actually a really cool design, and you know, the people working on it, they're doing some pretty impressive stuff. But we'll get to that next time.
In the meantime, I'll go look at it, because all I think of when I hear opposed piston is like Fairbanks Morse Ferry engines, you know, the opposed piston diesels.
Well, that's, you know, the first applications of the Acades are like, you know, they're for marine applications and stationary applications, but they've built some, you know, they've adapted that to smaller displacement engines as well, and they're doing some interesting stuff. But we'll get to that next time.
All right. Engines are cool. I'll go do my homework. All right, cool. Thanks for writing in, everybody. Keep writing in. And, you know, we'll catch everybody next week. We are at Wheelbearings with no vowels on Twitter. Just search. You'll find us.
Wheelbearings Cast.
Wheelbearings Cast. That's right. I don't know who at Wheelbearings is. Don't write to those guys. Write to Wheelbearings Cast and put the A in. I am Boston_Auto. You are Sam Abul Samid.
No underscores.
Yeah, we're everywhere. Ish. So, and we're just wheelbearings.media.
But soon I won't be on Facebook anymore.
All right, see that we can talk about why. But all right, carry on. Thanks for listening. We'll catch everybody next week.
See you next time.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. but not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.